Internal combustion engines make a comeback in the US. The Ford Lightning electric version production halted. The ID.4 production in the US discontinued. The fully electric Ram 1500 BEV development stopped. EVs are struggling in the United States, with some manufacturers posting multi-billion-dollar write-downs. The main reason, US President Trump has dismantled EV subsidies introduced by his predecessors. Several manufacturers are now pivoting back to combustion engines. Is that a mistake when conflict with Iran and the oil crisis are pushing up fuel prices? In 2025, the US was the world's second largest car market, with nearly 13 million vehicles sold, well behind China. But when it comes to new registrations of battery-powered electric vehicles, the US trails far behind China and the EU. And in 2026, that share is expected to sink. In the first quarter of 2026, EV registrations dropped by more than a quarter. That's because President Trump, who once praised Tesla,
wow, everything's computer,
had scrapped key subsidies and tax incentives for the electrification of road transport. The resulting dispute between Trump and Musk over EV subsidies made global headlines, nearly eclipsing what EV support was really about.
Transportation in the US is the #1 sector of the economy that contributes the most on carbon pollution, but also air pollution, nitrogen oxides and particulates. And air pollution kills, in the US, tens of thousands of people annually and millions of respiratory illnesses.
Margo Oge headed the EPA Office of Transportation and Air Quality and was also involved in uncovering the VW diesel scandal.
I was leading the office that set the first greenhouse gas standards for cars. And guess what? All the car manufacturers, for the first time in the history of EPA, came to the White House and celebrated with President Obama because they knew the way forward is not going to the old technology, gasoline, it's going to electrification.
Many US automakers converted their plants for EV production, often with government support. Trump's predecessor, President Biden's Inflation Reduction Act alone allocated more than $12 billion to expand EV adoption in the US. That included the development of charging infrastructure. There were also tax credits of up to $7,500 to offset the higher cost of EVs, originally aimed at lower-income households, but...
I don't know if you're familiar with the leasing loophole.
Stephanie Valdez-Streety works for Cox Automotive, a company that provides digital marketing solutions for around 40,000 car dealers worldwide.
We have the commercial EV credit, which from 2023 to 2025, about 1.4 million EVs were leased. And it's because there were no requirements to get that $7,500 off the cost of the vehicle. And so that really was an attractive selling tool for the dealers, but also for the consumers, very attractive.
But resentment at Biden's EV subsidies grew among Republicans. Some saw it as a waste of taxpayer money.
If electric vehicles are so swell, how come we have to pay people to drive them?
One answer: to promote innovation, a proven approach also used in competing markets like Europe and China.
There's a phase of new technology that's very difficult, which is you have an idea, you have a technology, it's potentially competitive, but you need scale for it in order to become actually competitive.
Pier Paolo Cazzola has worked for the UN, the IEA and the European Commission, among others.
You need to help catalyze that change. And so we are in a phase, I think, especially in Western countries that are still behind China in terms of the EV transition. And the policy is essentially innovation policy that helps bridging the barriers that we still have.
Under Trump, support for the new technology has come to an end. He made it clear during the campaign that he's not a fan of electric cars.
They don't go far. They cost a fortune.
Several manufacturers in the US are now returning to combustion engines.
If an automaker is going to, let's say, react to every change in policy, it's not going to work. It's going to be a little bit like the dog chasing the tail. You always try to always try to get it, but you can't.
Pedro Pacheco analyses the automotive and smart mobility sectors for the consultancy firm Gartner.
The key message from my side is that the world we live today is quite unstable. If you see what has been happening recently, there's been so many shifts in terms of policies, geopolitics, key events. So what this means is that an automaker, in order to face the current situation of unpredictability, because unpredictability is really the word, you need to define a course and stick to that course.
How sustainable is this strategy in the long term? How do global companies decide, especially those that don't produce solely for the US market? Volkswagen, for example, delivered 4.73 million vehicles worldwide in 2025. Most went to China and the EU. North America, the US and Canada combined, made up only a small fraction. Yet in the US, Europe's largest automaker is now betting on combustion engines, a major U-turn. Just a few years ago, Volkswagen invested $800 million to convert its Tennessee plant for EV production, also with government support. But the ID.4 is no longer being produced there. And Volkswagen must write off €500 million. Volkswagen told DW, "We remain fully committed to electrification as a long-term goal in the US, but we've had to adjust production based on demand. Electrification moves at the pace of the customer and the infrastructure." But this shift risks losing ground in the EV sector.
If they take that product out, it gives other manufacturers the opportunity to continue to gain market share and brand equity. So that's the risk, right?
What about other international manufacturers? Kia sold more electric vehicles, bucking the market trend.
And our electrified models overall are up 30%.
And it's ready to present a new model at the New York Auto Show. Honda is increasingly relying on hybrids. For many buyers, they serve as an entry point to the EV market, and they're the formula behind Toyota's success in the US market.
Toyota had since a long time been somewhat conservative about EVs. However, last quarter, Toyota sales in US, EV sales, have grown 79%. 79%. So what does that mean? While many OEMs have basically redirected focus away from EVs, Toyota is picking up the pieces. And thanks to that, and thanks to the fact that they are actually increasing focus on EVs, they are now picking up the market share of their competitors.
The expansion of electric mobility in the US is slowing. But globally, EVs are gaining traction, not just in industrialized countries, but also in emerging markets.
Nepal is the country with the second highest EV penetration in the world. And it's a poor country. And we imagine, how is that possible? Very simple, because Nepal, like many developing nations, spends a lot of its public budgets in oil purchases. These countries see EVs as a solution for problems, and you don't have the debates. And in these countries, EVs are not part of the political debate.
But in these markets, EVs need to be affordable. Chinese automakers are delivering exactly that. China's export share in non-OECD countries is growing, while Chinese exports are already growing fastest outside industrialized countries. And demand could continue to rise. Is the Chinese auto industry profiting from the oil crisis?
We have to look at who is the key beneficiary of that development at the moment. It's obviously the market or the player who can produce, develop EVs the fastest and also the cheapest. And this is clearly China.
Philip Zeidel was a manager at a Volkswagen subsidiary. He now advises international car makers.
We very often think mainly about Europe and the North American market, but we also have to see that the biggest impact perhaps is on the rest of world markets in Asia, Southeast Asia, and in Africa and Latin America, because there the price shocks in fossil fuels have a high impact. And on the other hand, the Chinese manufacturers are very well positioned there and have a very high market share already. So on these markets, I think the effect is even bigger.
And the US? It's not facing supply shortages, but fuel prices have still risen significantly.
The gas prices in the last few months have been crazy.
Dang, we really should have probably gone the electric route, like when we had the chance.
I save a lot of money when it comes to charging the vehicle, you know, with the gas prices being high.
Electrification rollout varies widely across US states. Leading the way is California, where roughly 1 in 3 newly registered electric cars in the US is on the road. The state is also promoting electric vehicles through strict regulatory policies. California Governor Gavin Newsom is an opponent of Donald Trump, and Trump has moved to curb California's EV policy. He has also moved to invalidate the so-called endangerment finding. Put simply, the finding that carbon dioxide emissions endanger public health.
EPA developed this, what is called the endangerment finding. It's a complicated word, but what it really means is that EPA collected all the scientific data at the time that clearly indicated that burning fossil fuels impacts climate, impacts public health, impacts every corner of the planet. And that was the document.
Trump and the current head of the EPA see things very differently. They want to cut costs through deregulation.
The endangerment finding and the regulations that were based on it didn't just regulate emissions. It regulated and targeted the American dream. And now the endangerment finding is hereby eliminated.
The endangerment finding is considered the legal basis of US climate policy. Is the abolition unconstitutional? 24 US states have jointly filed a lawsuit. What are their chances before the Supreme Court?
I mean, clearly we know that it's not the same Supreme Court now that was in 2007 that made that decision. But also we know that the science on climate change, it's stronger than it was in 2009. Climate change is not a hoax. There is not uncertainty, as EPA is claiming. There's actually more certainty now that climate change and carbon pollution, impacts public health and the environment across the globe.
But if the US state's lawsuit succeeds, the landscape could shift again. The conclusion, the US car market is decoupling from the global shift towards electric vehicles. But for how long?
Well, I must say that the situation in the US is quite unpredictable. I'm absolutely confident that EVs will win that market. The question is when. So basically, it's about the growth curve for EVs, if it's going to be a very steep curve or if it's going to be a very slow growing curve. And there's many factors associated with that.
One factor could be fuel prices, and Trump voters also pay more at the gas pump.
The topic has been the gas prices, right? We're not going to see a complete, behavior buying EVs immediately, but I think it changes the conversation and it changes consideration.
So was the US shift away from EV subsidies a mistake? Globally, the share of EVs continues to rise, especially in Asia. Incidentally, Tesla, the US pioneer of electric mobility, now sells most of its cars in China. What do you think? Can Trump really halt the shift towards electric mobility? And how might the US Supreme Court shape future climate policy? Let us know in the comments.